of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
You know, John, you can't put enough adjectives on this to describe how treasonous such a comment is.
Now, look, he says a lot of stuff, but that's the Republican frontrunner for the president of the United States, signaling to the Kremlin that he'll give them a free hand to invade their European neighbors if he's given a second term. That's more than the Kremlin could have asked for, even from Donald Trump.
All right, now I get it. It was Super Bowl weekend. The MAGA crowd were losing their mind at Biden trolling them over their Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, Bud Light psyop, but there were more pressing matters at hand. Comments made by the former president that, yeah, while par for the course, should never be overlooked.
I think that we could safely say this. Both of these men, they're both elderly, they're both going to make mistakes. Only one of them is encouraging Russia to invade NATO countries. So that is the clear difference
or try
here.
to overturn the 2020 election.
Of course.
Or talks about how he wants to be a dictator.
Right. The stakes are so obvious, and we are seeing the Biden team go on the offensive. Do some...
And thankfully they weren't. Not by former Press Secretary Jen Psaki, at least. Someone who on several occasions has stressed with urgency that when Trump spews inflammatory rhetoric like this, it shouldn't mean that we just look away in complacency, especially when the thing he said is music to Vladimir Putin's ears.
We had planned to start the show today by talking about the Supreme Court and all of the legal developments here this week, because there were a lot and they're all important. And we're still going to discuss all of it today at length. But we decided late last night that it was important to start today with something alarming Donald Trump said at a rally yesterday in South Carolina, because it's far too easy to be numb to it all, far too easy to ignore it. All the crazy things he says, often within the same speeches. But Trump is telling us what he's going to do. And it's important to listen and also talk about what the impact would actually be of what he's telling us.
Over the weekend, while on stage at a MAGA rally, in no uncertain terms, the 45th president said that he'd stand back and stand by if Russia were to invade NATO allies. Comments that were so egregious that former NATO Supreme Commander Wesley Clark slammed as treasonous.
But I did want to ask you, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, to react to Donald Trump's comments where he effectively invited Russia to invade NATO countries that may not have given as much to NATO as they are asked to.
You know, John, you can't put enough adjectives on this to describe how treasonous such a comment is.
And in her segment, Jen Psaki outlined the history of Trump's disparaging remarks on NATO, an alliance that has withstanded 3/4 of a century, that without, well, dictators like Vladimir Putin would look to replicate what he's doing in Ukraine.
Now, before we play it, here's a little background. Trump has, of course, long been a big critic and skeptic of NATO, the alliance that's held the world order together for 3/4 of a century. It's been pretty vital, and which came to the defense of the United States, remember, shortly after 9/11. His campaign website even contains this vague but very ominous sentence: we have to finish the process we began under my administration of fundamentally reevaluating NATO's purpose and NATO's mission. Now, why does that matter? Well, first of all, it has led to fears among our European allies, key partners around the world, that if Trump wins, he's going to pull out of NATO altogether, during a time, and this is vitally important, in which a Russian dictator is waging the first ground war in Europe since World War II. But yesterday, in South Carolina, Trump took things about a mile further than that. He said if NATO countries don't pay more, the U.S. will break its commitment to protect them against a Russian attack. And he said he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to those countries. Here it is.
If we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. That he'll give them a free hand to invade their European neighbors if he's given a second term. And as commander-in-chief, he would have the United States stand back and watch it happen. Let's be clear about what that would mean. Any attack on a NATO ally would trigger a massive show of force by its members across the world. That's because under Article 5, an attack on one is considered an attack on all. Just take it from the NATO Secretary General, who responded to Trump's comments with this, quote, any suggestion that allies will not defend each other undermines all of our security. And Donald Trump is not only saying he wouldn't come to the defense of a NATO ally, he is inviting Russia to attack them. I just cannot tell you how terrifying that type of language is for our allies, sitting and hearing and listening to what he's saying. And also how happy it must make Vladimir Putin. That's more than the Kremlin could have asked for, even from Donald Trump.
And highlighted not just the outright brazen fascism of it all, but in the wake of said comments, what was the wall-to-wall coverage about?
Given all of the things that have happened this week, including, and I know you asked Chris Christie about this, the fact that Donald Trump yesterday suggested that Vladimir Putin should have free rein in attacking NATO allies. Yeah. And what do we see when we wake up this morning? Wall-to-wall coverage of whether a guy who's 4 years older than his opponent is too old to be president.
Oh, that's right. More on Biden's age. And listen, we can play this game all day long. Trust me, there's enough footage of Trump gaffes to run laps around Biden.
Cognitive dissonance thing is fair game, though. And people want to minimize it and say, well, if he has 3 blunders and Joe Biden has 6, that's what it is. But, you know, the Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi mix-ups, the magnets and water, I mean, acting out missile defense systems, ding, 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 boom, whoosh. What kind of president?
But if we're going to play the gaffe game, let's play the gaffe game for a moment.
And we have a man who is totally corrupt and the worst president in the history of our country, who is cognitively impaired. We would be in World War II very quickly if we're going to be relying on this man. A very big hello to a place where we've done very well, Sioux Falls. Thank you very much, Sioux Falls. So Sioux City, he built almost 500 miles of wall. Even the Obama administration says it in their stats. They were interviewing him 2 weeks ago, and they said, what would you advise President Obama? Obama dropped missiles, and they ended up hitting a kindergarten. If that's the case, he's going to end up being indicted when he leaves office. They never report the crowd on January 6th. You know, Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people. A lot of people saw those documents. They didn't see the ones we had. We had them locked up, and we had Secret Service all the time because I was president all the time.
But the thing is, Trump's team want the media to engage in this back and forth because large swaths of the population have allowed a snake oil salesman to convince them that he's the cognitively sound candidate because, yeah, he spews incoherent diatribe, but he does it with confidence, as opposed to, say, someone stuttering now and again.
I wonder what Dr. Herr would have to say about all of that. Curious. Well, the last one about being president all the time was not from a long time ago. It was actually just from yesterday. And we could keep going. Believe me, we could fill an entire show, hours of shows. But honestly, it's beside the larger point because Trump's gaffing is not even close to what the biggest risks of electing him are. And if we continue to focus on questions like who is the bigger gaffe machine or what is the mental acuity difference between a 77-year-old and an 81-year-old, then we are all doing something very wrong.
And they'll dine out on that back and forth because it takes the heat away from the fact that, well, he wishes economic turmoil on everyday Americans.
When there's a crash, I hope it's going to be during this next 12 months because I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. The one president, I just don't want to be Herbert Hoover.
Donald Trump hopes millions of Americans lose their money from their 401ks and retirement savings within the next 12 months. So he doesn't look bad.
Wants border chaos.
Donald Trump. He said any Republican who votes for this deal should be ashamed of themselves. You've said you speak to him frequently and that you've discussed this deal with him, quote, at length. Is Donald Trump calling the shots here, Mr. Speaker?
Of course not. He's not calling the shots.
And is seemingly bending the knee to one of the world's most dangerous leaders. Any debate or coverage that discusses both candidates going forward that does not bring up these wildly dangerous comments is a failure on the media front.
Because in this election, one of the two candidates fomented an insurrection, didn't lift a finger to stop an angry mob from his supporters from storming the Capitol or step up to do anything when they were openly threatening to hang his very own vice president. One of the two candidates in this race has bragged about assaulting women, defamed her, and was found liable of doing just that. One of the two candidates in this race is openly threatening to use the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. One of the two candidates in this race is channeling Adolf Hitler in stump speeches. And one of the two candidates said just yesterday that he would encourage Russia to attack our NATO allies. None of that's hyperbole. It's all on tape. So are we really going to make this election about who confuses two states more frequently? What are we doing here? Yes, the age stuff is on people's minds. It is in the political ether. We shouldn't live in denial about that. It's also self-perpetuating, for the most part, by people who have never spent 1 second with Joe Biden. But we cannot let this become the dominant focus of this campaign, because that is not what this election is actually about.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.